The air hung heavy in the hushed town of Lakewood, Colorado, with a silent, sober palette of grays and blues that mirrored the austere life of its inhabitants. Among these stoic souls was Paul, a man of quiet strength and taciturn countenance, his life a testament to fortitude in the face of tragedy. He sat in his den, weathered fingers gently tracing the delicate outline of a woman's face in a faded sepia photograph. It was a ritual, his silent requiem to the mother he had lost too early in the vagaries of life. Her smile was trapped forever in the still frame, unchanging, undying, an echo of a love that time had been unable to erode. The soft afternoon light slanted through the window, painting an ethereal glow around the edges of the photograph, a halo around his mother's face. There were no tears in his eyes, only a quiet intensity that spoke volumes of battles fought and won within the confines of his soul. Paul's life was an interplay of light and shadow, the light of his kindness, his fairness to all, and the shadow of his traumatic past. His generous nature was known throughout Lakewood. He had a way of making people feel heard, of soothing their troubled spirits. His mother had always told him, "Words, my dear boy, are the most powerful tool a man can wield." Perhaps it was these words that had guided him into the realm of journalism, his articles a beacon of light for the little town, often enshrouded in its own darkness. The latest darkness to befall Lakewood was a string of puzzling kidnappings, the victims seemingly swallowed by the night. The epicenter of this inexplicable phenomenon appeared to be the town's junkyard, an ominous relic of past industry now languishing in decay, an enigma waiting for him to dissect it. Driven by a curious amalgamation of desire to shine light onto this darkness and an almost masochistic pull towards the shadows, he volunteered to dive into this maelstrom of uncertainty. As he announced his intentions in the local newspaper office, the room fell silent. The clattering of typewriters ceased, the telephone conversations ended abruptly, and all eyes fell upon him. A murmur of apprehension rippled through the room, yet no one dared question his resolve. One by one, they returned to their tasks, their fears unspoken but hanging heavily in the room like a tangible presence. All except one, the seasoned editor, Jim, his eyes still locked onto Paul. "You sure about this, Paul?" Jim asked, his gruff voice lowering to a whisper. Paul nodded. "I need to do this, Jim. For them, and for myself." The old editor simply patted Paul's shoulder, understanding reflected in his eyes, his words unneeded. The shadows of the past and the present seemed to merge into a looming challenge. Yet Paul stood undeterred at the precipice of this terrifying investigation, the quiet echo of his mother's voice whispering through the silence. A man's strength lies not in his muscles, but in his heart. As the day bled into a twilight tableau, the town of Lakewood lay suspended in an eerie calm, its quiet broken only by the rustling of the newspaper announcing the dawn of a chilling investigation, the spectral junkyard looming ominously in the distance. The junkyard of Lakewood stood on the outskirts of the town like a skeletal monument to human decay. Its entrance, an iron-wrought gate with rusted hinges, opened to a world where the past lingered amidst corroded metals and discarded fragments of forgotten lives. The carcasses of vehicles once proudly owned now lay bare to the elements, their stories silenced in the oblivion of rust. Paul stood before this gate, its skeletal silhouette casting long shadows that stretched towards him like wraith-like fingers. He could feel the weight of countless gazes upon him, the curious and the concerned peering from behind their drapes. Yet he stood resolute, his posture reflecting the steel of his determination. He pushed the gate open, its grating shriek a dissonant fanfare to his solemn initiation into the junkyard's cryptic realm. The junkyard's custodian was a gnarled figure named Old Tom, a man who seemed as ancient and weather-beaten as the scrap that surrounded him. Upon seeing Paul, his usual grumbling receded into an unusual silence. His eyes, under a forest of wiry brows, were hard, unreadable stones. Paul broke the silence, extending a firm hand. "Good morning, Tom." A pause lingered before Tom reciprocated, his grip as unyielding as the junkyard he presided over. "Journalist," he muttered, his voice gravelly from years of tobacco and solitude. Paul's investigation began in earnest. He questioned Tom about the disappearances, unraveling threads of evasive answers and cryptic half-truths. Amidst Tom's brusque words and subtle warnings, Paul sensed an underlying dread, a pervasive aura of unspoken terror. The hours melded into each other as Paul delved deeper, navigating through the labyrinth of the junkyard, his diligent eyes uncovering disturbingly surreal symbols etched onto rusty metal surfaces. They resembled no known language or code, their alien intricacy and anomaly amidst the decay. As dust painted the sky in strokes of flaming oranges and reds, a cacophony arose from the bowels of the junkyard, a dreadful wailing that shivered through the air, rattling his resolve. It was not mechanical, nor was it human. It was a discordant symphony of anguish and dread that faded as suddenly as it had begun, leaving behind an eerie silence and an insidious feeling of being observed. He left the junkyard that day, its looming silhouette a grotesque specter against the twilight sky. The rustling whispers of Lakewood accompanied him, the townsfolk's eyes reflecting a cocktail of admiration, fear, and apprehension. Their words were careful, measured, yet the silence between them screamed louder, echoing the sinister wailing from the depths of the junkyard. Old Tom stood at the gates, watching Paul leave, his usually impassive face betraying a glimmer of relief. Or was it fear? "I hope you know what you're stirring, journalist," he called out to Paul, his voice carried on the dying wind. The cryptic warning hung in the air, the final note of the day's eerie symphony. Dawn graced Lakewood with an air of unspoken dread, a languid light piercing through the slumbering town, drawing long, creeping shadows from the corners. Paul, his rest perturbed by a night of restless visions, found himself at the cusp of these converging lights and shadows, both literally and metaphorically. The eerie wailing of the junkyard echoed in his mind, resonating with his unease. As he readied himself for another day at the grim Monolith of Decay, his reflection stared back at him, a mirror image of a man caught in the crossfire between reality and a burgeoning nightmare. The cafe's clamor subsided as he walked in, conversations trailing off, gazes averting and yet subtly trailing his path. The silent reverence afforded to a man walking a path none dared tread was palpable. Nestled in the corner of the cafe was Martha, the town's historian and former spiritualist. She beckoned Paul over, her eyes holding a glimmer of something resembling fear and fascination. Over cups of tepid coffee, Martha unveiled Lakewood's forgotten lore, a tapestry of chilling narratives embroidered with whispers of an ancient curse, a cautionary tale handed down generations. She spoke of an otherworldly entity known to the region's Native American ancestors, a malevolent force that was subdued but never fully banished. Her voice dropped to a hush as she murmured, "They say it can't be seen, only felt. A dread so profound it seeps into your bones and curdles your soul." Paul felt a chill, his mind recalling the unseen eyes of the junkyard, the alien symbols etched in rust, and the wailing that seemed less like metal groaning and more like an ethereal creature keening in the twilight. Nights were no longer a solace, but a theater for grotesque nightmares. He saw himself in the labyrinthine junkyard, pursued by horrifying figures that reached out from shadowy corners, eerily similar to his childhood dreams where unknown specters lurked in the wake of his mother's demise. Yet a piece of him acknowledged this fear, recognizing it as an old acquaintance from the darker recesses of his psyche, unearthing it to be faced, challenged, and perhaps overcome. Despite the mounting dread, he found an uncanny resolve fueling him. He traced his journey back to the spectral junkyard, the realm of forgotten relics and unsettling truths. The path was fraught with an insidious terror that gnawed at his edges, yet he stood unyielding, the beacon in this enshrouding darkness, driven by a primal need to face the unseen dread. The junkyard, under the heavy blanket of dusk, was no longer just a relic of decay. It was the very embodiment of his fears, past and present. He was not merely walking into a physical location. He was descending into an abyss, one that threatened to swallow him into its bowels, just like the unsolved kidnappings he sought to illuminate. Under the waxing gibbous, the junkyard transformed from an ominous monument of decay to an otherworldly landscape of lurking dread. Its labyrinthine passages wound into the darkness, a serpentine path to the heart of the terror that lay shrouded in the abyss. Paul, armed with his trusty notepad and a trembling flashlight, trod the whispering paths. The air was thick with the scent of rust and an intangible menace, an unseen specter of dread that brushed past him in spectral whispers, making his hair stand on end. He descended further into the abyss, guided by a pulsating hum that resonated from the ground beneath him. An old, forgotten well stood sentinel in a shadowed corner of the junkyard, taking the role of the mouth of the abyss. It was this well from which the keening wails seemed to emanate, a chilling lament that veined its way through the metal carcasses of the yard. Casting the flashlight's faltering beam into the well, Paul's heart pounded in his ears. The beam of light fell onto another alien symbol etched into the side of the well. It was alive, pulsating with a strange, hypnotic glow. The earth beneath him trembled, and he felt an inescapable pull, a voiceless beckoning from the unseen depths. A sudden gust of wind snuffed out his flashlight, plunging him into absolute darkness. Panic threatened to strangle him, but he clenched his fists, the texture of the notepad grounding him. He remembered his mother's calm voice in the backdrop of his childhood nightmares. "Look fear in the face and it will bow to you." Summoning his courage, he called out into the impenetrable darkness, his voice echoing ominously, "I am not afraid of you." His declaration was a desperate plea, a confrontation, and a naked confession. The wind carried his words into the abyss, and for a moment, the eerie wailings ceased. In this surreal moment, he confronted not only the unseen entity, but also the specter of his past trauma, his declaration echoing in the chambers of his childhood fear. His heart pounded, yet he stood his ground, a pillar of resilience against the unseen horror. With a sudden onslaught, the wailing resumed, a cacophony that threatened to shatter his resolve. But he was no longer the scared child, nor the cautious journalist. He was Paul, the man who stared into the abyss and lived to tell the tale. The sudden return of his flashlight beam broke his trance, illuminating the terrifying spectacle of the well. Breathing heavily, he retreated from it, his every step a triumph against the malevolent entity. As he exited the junkyard, leaving behind the morbid labyrinth and the echoing dread, old Tom stood by the gate, a flicker of respect in his stone-hard eyes. "You've stirred the devil, journalist," he muttered. The gravity of his words was a chilling endnote to the night's horrific symphony. As Paul walked home, the silent town bore witness to his ordeal, their whispers weaving tales of a man who dared to descend into the abyss. Under the ashen pallor of the dawn, Lakewood seemed to hold its collective breath. The town had witnessed Paul's descent into the abyss and his eventual return. His silent house bore the resonance of the past night's terror, its walls echoing with the distant wailing from the junkyard's abyss. Sitting at his desk, the ephemera of his investigation laid bare before him, he felt a strange disquiet. He had faced the unseen dread, the malevolent entity that haunted the town, but he hadn't vanquished it. He had merely confronted it, acknowledged its existence. In doing so, he had confronted his past, faced the trauma that had haunted him since his mother's demise. He realized he was a changed man, no longer the quiet journalist, but a survivor of an encounter with the unspeakable cosmic horror. Writing his experiences, he meticulously recorded the peculiar symbols, the nightmarish wailing, and the eeriness that lay thick upon the junkyard. His words were an account of a terrifying reality, an ancient evil seeping into the very fabric of the town, and a testament to his personal journey. The pen in his hand trembled, not with fear, but with a cold acceptance of the ghastly truth. Meanwhile, the town murmured about their silent hero. The cafe buzzed with whispers of the man who dared to face the unseen dread. Martha, nursing her cup of coffee, wore a look of knowing concern. The town's historian understood the cosmic scale of what he had experienced, and she knew that though he had returned from the abyss, he would never truly escape it. He mailed his investigative report to his editor, the details of his encounter with a cosmic entity shrouded in the mystery of missing persons and the oddities of the junkyard. A sense of accomplishment enveloped him, not because he solved the case, but because he had faced his fears, both worldly and otherworldly. Yet freedom eluded him. He could still feel the unseen dread lingering at the periphery of his consciousness. At night, the distant wailing echoed in his dreams, and he woke up to the ghostly symbols imprinted in his mind. The terror of the abyss had seeped into him, a haunting reminder of the dread that lay dormant in the junkyard. Life moved on in Lakewood. The junkyard remained a haunting silhouette against the skyline, its iron-wrought gates a gateway to an abyss of cosmic horror. Children were cautioned against nearing it, their curious eyes wide at the tales of the man who dared to venture into it. And amidst them, Paul lived on, a silent sentinel, a survivor. Thank you for tuning in. If you enjoyed our content, show your support with a like and subscribe, and stay notified by hitting the bell icon. Expect more cosmic horror from Eldritch Tales Factory, and feel free to explore our other stories. See you in the next video.